Quick disclaimer before you listen. The World's Okayest Medic Podcast is an educational and commentary platform produced and recorded by me. What we say on here is not endorsed by any of our employers, and we are not speaking on behalf of our employers. Our commentary is our own. Finally, remember to follow your local protocols. It's Saturday morning coffee talk. Getting off of a night shift. I look like death. My hair is a mess. I put some water and ran a comb through it if you're watching on YouTube. Also, I have some stuff to talk about. I have it pulled up on my dual screen here. YouTube watchers, this glare drives me nuts. If you're listening on Spotify or some other audio app, I'm talking about the shadow box behind me. But when I redo this whole space, I'm going to keep the glare in mind. I wasn't thinking about that when I put this space together, but now that I'm getting better at this, I'm starting to pay more attention to this stuff, and I'll get rid of this glare. It probably bothers me more than it bothers anyone else. I talked about the croup kid that I took to the adult hospital on the last coffee talk. As I predicted, I would be getting sick from him. I have about a 1 out of 10 scratchy throat, which is not a big deal, but it does worry me because my kids are sick. 2 of the 3 of them are home from school. My son is knocked on his ass, which is very abnormal for him. He's normally a tough little creature. But we power through, we move on, we overcome adversity here on this podcast, and we're not going to let that little fucker with croup get me down. I recorded with my friend Mike Damcott this week. He is a wilderness medic. He works with the he works with the National Park Service. I've gotten to know him through a course he took and through a couple conferences we've been to together. Good guy. I like him a lot. The wilderness thing is something that is totally foreign to me, so I had him on the podcast this week. We had a great conversation. And what am I going to have a great conversation with a wilderness medic about? Well, of course, artificial intelligence. That's actually what he came on the podcast to talk about, was AI, because at his day job, he is a tech guy. So we talked about AI and EMS, and it was a phenomenal discussion. So I get off with him. And then I recorded a quick thing for Nurse Gwenny. Her business is expanding. Check her out. She's knocking it out of the park. She's doing a great job. So I recorded a quick little 30-second snippet for her. And then I edited that, and I'm going through my projects on my Descript thing here. And I had some old clutter, and I deleted the old clutter, and I inadvertently deleted the episode that I had just recorded with Mike. And I wanted to start crying because I wasted 45 minutes of Mike's time, and it was a great podcast. It was one of those discussions with a guest where you just don't have to edit anything at all, which is really nice to do on my end. And it was just a good discussion, and I clutched my chest. I tried a couple different things to get it back, but no, Mike was super nice about it. He has a podcast, EMS on the Mountain. You should check it out. And he's like, dude, it's happened to me. We'll just record again. No big deal. So look for Mike and I to get back together and record. And Mike, if you're listening, I love you. I'm sorry. Also, I recorded Friday with Paul Sheets, who's another guy I've gotten to know from conferences. He was at Resus X. He is a flight medic and an educator from Florida. Good dude, smart guy. We talked about simulation training and such. And then Friday, my friend, Dr. Nick Gioni, pulmonologist, Pulm Toilet on Instagram, is coming back to the podcast. This will be his 3rd time on the podcast. He was recently on a few weeks ago to talk about the scape thing and high dose nitro, that with it came such a hot debate. So he's coming back onto the podcast, and he's bringing Dr. Scott Weingart with him. So we will be recording that on Friday. So should be good. And also, I have Dr. Antevi and Dr. Mark Peel coming back on. We're recording next month. Why? We'll get to it. One other business thing for Patreon followers. I'm going to either today or tomorrow be looking at my calendar and finding when we can do an October virtual happy hour for the Patreon subscribers. The Patreon is $3 a month. There's a link to it on my Instagram. If you can contribute $3 a month to help out the podcast, that is great. What do you as a Patreon follower get? Well, really nothing. It's just a way of giving back to the podcast because this is a lot of work to put on. If you like the podcast and you want to contribute, it is a big help when it comes to paying for all the platforms and tech and stuff that is associated with this. Because I do put a good deal of money into the podcast, but doing the Patreon it's been a year now in December. That really has helped to offset the cost. So Patreon followers, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you. I wish I could do more for the Patreon followers, but I'm just between two jobs, family, podcasts and stuff. I just don't have the time to do it. I don't have an assistant. This is a one-man army. That's why I keep it $3. Like if I was taking $15, $20, I would have to do extra content, but I think $3 is cheaper than a cup of coffee at most places, especially on the West Coast. So I do this thing I call a virtual happy hour for the Patreon followers, where we all get together on a Google Meet. It's 1 hour and people from across the world get together and they talk about their systems. We laugh, we have fun. We meet each other's pets, dogs, kids. It's a good time. I do look forward to it. So I will be scheduling that. Okay, let's get to the coffee talk. I'm going to bring up the end-tidal thing, and then I think I am done with this topic. I'm not going to do a summarization of what I've been talking about as far as end-tidal, because I think people already know the discussion. My friends from Canada, DNR, they've done some stuff countering what I've been saying, which is great. I mean, their content is good. I don't know if I agree with all of it. I wasn't able to respond to some of it over the last few days just because I have some life stuff, nothing bad, but I have some normal life stuff going on that has precluded me from being on my phone as much, which actually is kind of nice. But they put out a 3 or 4 part series responding to my assertion that end-tidal is overused and I think has very limited utility. And kudos to them for doing research. They provided lots of citations. So they came back, and others, there's been a ton of discussion on this, which is great. But coming back and countering what I say, and I only use non-invasive end-tidal CO2. This is just me. You want to use it on every patient? Have at it. But I just use it to tell whether the patient is breathing or not. And I want to determine whether they are hypoventilating. That's what I use it for. All this perfusion stuff, waveform changes and respiratory distress, I think is largely a lot of talk that has been sold to the EMS community that is not really rooted in good data and really has quite limited utility. I talked about as far as waveforms, I can't tell you how many dying COPDers or crashing asthmatics where I haven't seen a shark fin waveform, or I've looked at the number of the end-tidal value and it really doesn't make sense. And when I'm trying to figure out why is the number either like super high or super low, I'm thinking to myself, why am I even thinking about this? Does it matter? No, it doesn't matter for our intents and purposes. I also have gone to great lengths to try and dispel what we have been taught in EMS education, that the end-tidal CO2 almost exactly matches the P CO2, not going any more into depth with it. But what I have seen in the discussion is a lot of people coming back and arguing for using end-tidal CO2 as a predictor of a decline in cardiac output. And people have come at me with sources. DNR's come at me with sources. My good friend Josh from Alert Medic One, we're going to talk about this. Not at the bar when we go out, Josh, but we're going to talk about this on a podcast. So I keep hearing people say, I use it to maybe clue me into sepsis. I see sepsis a lot in the discussion. It clues me into hemorrhagic shock. If they're not in hemorrhagic shock yet, like full blown that I'm seeing, if the end-tidal is trending low, I can see that they're about to be in hemorrhagic shock. So maybe they've got bleeding somewhere. What else? Pulmonary embolism. And just generalized, I trend it. And if I see it going lower, then I know that their cardiac output is dropping. And I will say that I've looked at the sources people have put, I've looked at the arguments, and I've thought about my own training and experience. And I can buy on to that. And people are probably going, what? You're changing your mind? No, I'm not changing my mind. I can buy onto that stuff that if you have a drop in cardiac output or you got a PE and there's, VQ mismatch, you might see a low end tidal. I can get into physiologically how that might make sense, but I think that all of this stuff that people are arguing is actually helping my argument that non-invasive end-tidal CO2 has extremely limited utility in the pre-hospital environment. Now, how can that be? Well, going by all this stuff, it could be sepsis, PE, hemorrhagic shock, whatever drop in cardiac output, VQ mismatch. That is all telling me that if your end tidal is trending low, then that can be indicative that something is wrong, which has the diagnostic utility of some passerby driving past a homeless guy on the street corner and calling 911 and saying, hey, I thought they looked sick. What use is that? I don't see really how that helps us / provide additional information that you can't get from good history taking and a careful head to toe, look, listen, and feel and vital signs physical assessment. Now, somebody did write a comment. I don't have it here. I have a couple comments that I'm going to talk about. We're going to get to it, but those aren't about end tidal. Somebody wrote that end tidal CO2 is a better indicator of cardiac output than the NIBP. Well, I don't believe it. Provide me with some data, because I provided you all with a fair amount of data that shows that non-invasive end tidal CO2 is not that accurate and that there are definite questions how valuable that value is. So really, tidal CO2 is better indicative of cardiac output than an NIBP. And I'm just going to say blood pressure, because actually Josh from Alert Medic 1 has talked about this before, NIBP versus a manual blood pressure auscultating a systolic and a diastolic, that actually, if you look at the data, there's not really data that supports one or the other. They're probably equally as good. But I do not buy that end tidal CO2 is a better prognosticator or indicator of cardiac output than the blood pressure. Let's take my son. He's upstairs. He's sick. He's laying in bed. He's got a 101 fever. He feels like shit. He's probably a little tachypnic because he has a fever. He's also probably a little tachycardic because he has a fever. He is FINE fine. He just needs to rest, hydrate, and get better. So let's go upstairs and take his vital signs. Let's just say it comes back, heart rate's 116, blood pressure comes back 112 over 74, which actually will give you an increased shock index if you think about it. This is why you have to take everything in context. And let's say because he's breathing a little bit elevated because he has a fever, his end tidal comes back at 26. Are you telling me that he is in septic shock because his end tidal will come back at 26? First off, then let's add a little bit of oxygen to it. That's further going to dilute that sample. And if you look at the end tidal stuff, even the people who make it admit that the oxygen might dilute the sample. That's in the fine print. And you've always heard me say that the fine print is far more important than the selling price. So you're telling me the good blood pressure, I'm just going to look at the end tidal and I'm going to start Levophed. Let's start broad spectrum antibiotics. Let's put a central line in them. Now, BS, as Joe Biden would have said, that is a bunch of malarkey. So that's what I have to say about end tidal. I think I'm done talking about this topic. If you want to use it, you want to put it on every patient, have at it. If it makes you feel good, if it makes you feel smart, makes you feel important. But me, I'm only going to continue to use it in those sedate patients, whether I've sedated them or whether they've sedated themselves or whether they have deep altered mental status for whatever reason, and I'm not intubating them. I'm going to keep using it to make sure that they are ventilating. As a doctor who I talked to said that sometimes they can look like they're breathing because their diaphragm is still moving, but they're not actually ventilating, and tidal CO2 confirms that they're actually ventilating. I really like that. I'm going to use that in teaching points. But that's what I'm going to continue to use it for, is confirming ventilation and I guess airway patency, for lack of a better term. Anyway, let's move on. Kind of bridging into this, there were a lot of comments on end tidal, and that's not what's making me think about this next thing that I'm going to bring up. It's the blood thing that is making me think of this, but I actually did see some end-tidal stuff, just like the end-tidal is a better indicator of cardiac output than blood pressure. I want to talk about simple regurgitation of information because I have seen comments about the blood stuff, and I saw it in the end-tidal, I have to be honest, like regurgitation of information. Like in the end-tidal thing, I saw several people mention Q SOFA. You combine end-tidal with a Q SOFA score of whatever, and that will accurately predict the patient in septic shock. And I have to admit, I did. I rolled my eyes anytime I saw Q SOFA and then saying you can use that to predict septic shock. First off, Q SOFA has kind of been like poo-pooed, cast out to the wayside. They talked about this at Resusx. This doctor gave a very, very good lecture on sepsis and predicting who's going to be septic. And they've looked at different scores. They've looked at Sears criteria plus infectious source. And this one doctor said, you can use all the diagnostics in the world. You can use all this fancy scores that people have written in the world. But the only thing that has been consistently shown to be the superior diagnostic for sepsis is Gestalt, is the doctor or whoever provider, their Gestalt, looking at the patient and saying they are septic. That has, and I've looked this up before, and he's absolutely right, that has trumped every fancy diagnostic or scoring tool they have tried to use for sepsis. So let's talk about Q SOFA. Why did I roll my eyes anytime I saw people bring up Q SOFA? Because I thought you're just regurgitating information because you've heard Q SOFA, you've heard about it applying to septic shock, and you know that it is a predictor in septic shock. Q SOFA does not predict who is going to be septic or who is going to be in septic shock. Q SOFA stands for Quick Sequential Organ Failure Assessment. Organ failure is the endpoint of septic shock. What I'm trying to say is that Q SOFA does not predict sepsis. It predicts mortality in the patient who is septic. So when I hear somebody who says, oh, well, we use the Q SOFA score to predict our septic shock patients. Like, no, you're not. You're just regurgitating that you have heard Q SOFA before. If you took 10 seconds to look it up, you would know that it is not a predictor for sepsis. It's a predictor for mortality in patients who are septic. So getting back to the regurgitation thing, I try really, really hard on this podcast to avoid just regurgitating information. I'm not going to name names, but there are a couple, and it's not anybody who has been in my comments on this stuff or anybody who I have collaborated with. Nevertheless, there are a couple of influencers who I see regurgitating information. I saw a reel by somebody who was talking about a very common med that we administer, and I was watching it, and I got sent it by another content creator. And I thought, my God, you probably administer this medication every day, and you are showcasing to the world that you have no idea what you are talking about. But nevertheless, you are putting this medication in human beings' bodies. It bothered me. But I try really hard to not regurgitate information. I could probably, by now, 6 years of doing the podcast, I think I've gotten pretty decent at it. I could probably get up here at this desk, set my camera, this microphone up, and I could probably regurgitate a bunch of stuff about neonatology and sound relatively intelligent, but I'm not going to do that because I don't know jack shit about neonatology past the handful of critically ill babies I've taken care of and what I've learned in continuing ed and in the NRP class. I don't do neonatal transport. I'm not a neonatal expert. Therefore, you're not going to hear me put out a podcast where I am teaching the masses or opining things about neonatology because I'm just not qualified, and it's going to be mindless regurgitation of information. If I cover a topic that I don't know a lot about, I'm going to bring on an expert who knows what they are talking about, like Mike Damcott. I wanted to talk about AI because it's a topic that I'm interested in and I think it's worth talking about. I know nothing about it. I know how to use the Descript app I know how to use a word processor, I know how to use Google, and I know how to use the Pornhub search engine. That is my knowledge of tech. I am not a tech guy. Mike is. So I had him come on to talk about tech stuff because I'm not going to get up here and talk about stuff that I don't know. So I'm rambling. Let me bring this into the blood thing. I have seen some comments on the social medias that were simple regurgitation of information. I put out on social media that I got from my contacts in Massachusetts that the Massachusetts Medical Services Committee they have been delaying. The politics leading up to the whole ground getting blood thing and how Air Medical flipped a shit. Now a bunch of doctors tried to arguably block ground services from getting blood and it became a whole thing, blah, blah, blah. You've all heard the story a gazillion times. So last week, the Massachusetts Medical Services Committee that oversees EMS they've been delaying. They were supposed to vote on it. They didn't. They have tabled it to get more information, which is a classic bureaucracy delaying tactic. The ability for non-air medical, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. They have delayed allowing pre-hospital EMS services to administer blood products to the pediatric patient in shock. So I put some stuff on Instagram and Nerd Facebook, LinkedIn about this, and it did generate some discussions. I get some screenshots. So somebody who is in the air medical community posted a long post. They're in the air medical community up there. And when I read it, I thought, yeah, definitely no agenda there. You're not showing your ass there. But I also thought, oh my God, this is somebody just regurgitating information and they are showcasing to the world that they don't know what they are talking about. So I will read the comment, and it said that while I don't have anything to do with the committee and certainly cannot speak to their specific reasoning for this, I can perhaps share some perspective from my experience and understanding in giving blood to kids. So we have a pediatric hematologist here in the comments because they wear a flight suit. And my assumption as to what reasonably could be driving this delay. And here comes the bullshit, the regurgitation. Giving blood to kids is very high risk. It's not. As Army EM doc said, I reposted my reel from last year where I said there's an emerging body of thought that crystalloid is bad for kids in hemorrhagic shock and that blood is the way to go. Army EM doc, who you all know, love, and should follow, he commented it's not emerging. It is settled science. Blood is safe for kids in hemorrhagic shock. So I digress, but first sentence is wrong. Giving blood to kids is very high risk and is something that is not taken lightly, which I agree with. Even in tertiary pediatric centers with very experienced pediatric EM and critical care physicians, which is who I've learned from, their error, not mine. There is a lot of physiologic nuance to the administration of blood in pediatrics, and they are at much higher risk for complications from non-cross products and just from blood products in general. Regurgitation. This is old dogma. If you picked up a journal and just didn't listen to a bunch of biased physicians up in Massachusetts, if you read, you educated yourself, you would know that you are just spewing dogma that has been dispelled. Comment continues. While there is obviously also risk in giving blood to adults, the benefit largely outweighs that risk. Very correct. If an adult that maybe didn't need blood gets it or gets more than they needed, the risk exists, but is usually pretty worth the potential benefit. My understanding is that the same does not necessarily apply for pediatrics and that the benefit may not always outweigh the risk. And so there's typically a more conservative approach. That if you have picked up a journal and read, if you have taken the half hour to 60 minutes to educate yourself and go down PubMed rabbit holes, you would know that due to this conservative approach, a lot of kids in hemorrhagic shock have arguably unnecessarily died. So of course there are some black and white cases when it comes to benefit versus reward, but there are far more cases that are as gray as could be. I don't know if you see a pale, clammy, diaphoretic, hypotensive kid who is bleeding after a trauma, how that could be a gray area. And I wear a flight suit too, so that does automatically qualify me to be an expert in all areas. But as an example, while the organization I work for does have the ability to give blood to pediatrics because you're air medical, the criteria is very specific and there is not a blanket standing order. I don't know if many places that just have a blanket standing order for anything. Most protocols do have criteria that you have to meet in order to apply that remedy to that patient. And that with an experienced tertiary specialty pediatric critical care team. Oh my God. So while I certainly don't think the community ALS program should never be able to give blood to pediatric patients, it's kind of what you're saying. I know you're saying you're not saying that, but that's kind of what you said. I do think that it's very important for the legitimate risks to be known and understood, which are overstated, and the training and oversight needs to be commensurate with those risks. I agree with that. And I don't know that we're just there yet. Well, I think the rest of the world is there already. I think that the New England air medical community might be way behind the times and really need to keep up. They end the quote with, I understand there may be some very silly things that happen at those higher administrative levels, which is absolutely true. But perhaps this one might be worth pumping the brakes on until the community blood program in Massachusetts expands and matures a little more. So let's just let more little kids in hemorrhagic shock bleed and have their mortality increase. We need more training and more education before we can get this life-saving remedy out on the street. We have to walk before we run, and giving blood to kids is sprinting. Let me reiterate that just because you do flight, and this comes from me, I'm in the flight community. 11, 12 years now flying. I precept new hires. I've traveled the country teaching the fucking flight medical provider course when I worked for Impact EMS. And I have to say that there are a lot of people out there who get this inflated ego and sense that they know what they are talking about as soon as they put on a flight suit. I don't get it. A helicopter is just a friggin' ambulance. It is. Now, I will argue that yes, you should have, classically, if you think about flight teams, you get a highly experienced nurse, a highly experienced medic, you bring them together and you make a pretty smart team with a lot of years of combined experience and discipline to render exceptional care to the patient. I don't know if that happens much anymore because a lot of teams are short just like everybody else, and they're hiring people who I would argue are not qualified for these flight spots. Nevertheless, I see people who put on a flight suit and they automatically think that they are some fucking genius. It is not the case. Just because you work on a team that allows you to fly on a helicopter, wear a flight suit, and maybe do some protocols that are far above what regular ground EMS is allowed to do, does not necessarily make you an expert in those things. Like Flowlan. We can administer Flowlan on my team. Ground EMS in New Jersey cannot administer Flowlan. Am I an expert on Flowlan? Fuck no, I am not. What, like the 5 times I've given it in 6 years has made me an expert just because I'm allowed to do it? No. Do I maybe know a little bit more than the average paramedic about it? Probably. But expert, am I going to go out there and be like, hey guys, I work, this is very nuanced, and I work for a very acclaimed flight team. And as I'm in my tight flight suit here typing, let me educate you all from my pedestal up on this ivory tower. Like, give me a break. I've heard a lot about the RH incompatibility thing and ABO incompatibility or whatever. And somebody messaged me and they were from this program, and they were like, unless they can explain RH incompatibility, they shouldn't be administering blood products. And I thought, what the fuck do you know about RH incompatibility? Going back to the regurgitation thing, coming full circle, what do you know about it? Other than regurgitating that you know blood, woman, childbearing age, maybe be pregnant, bad, may attack the fetus, need ROGAM. What past that do you really know? I don't know much past that. Really, can you go to a whiteboard and draw out the chemistry of that? Shut up. I have to be honest. I read another comment this week. This was also from somebody from the air medical program up in Massachusetts. One of them, they have been saying that We are not telling people not to use the ground trucks that have blood. Like we have none of us have said that. Well, somebody commented just this week on this. I just want to help the public understand. Every medical helicopter in New England carries blood. The blood trucks are ALS, Advanced Life Support Units, that carry blood to provide to their community or as mutual aid to surrounding towns. However, if you have called a helicopter, it's useless to take that ALS unit out of its service area to provide care that a helicopter crew can do. In essence, hey, don't take that resource away from the community. Just use us. They're saying, oh, we haven't told anybody to not use the blood truck, but their people are doing this. Now, I know it's not the program administrators doing this. They're not doing this on behalf of the program, but I cannot believe that at this point, the managers of that flight team have not put a gag order on people and just been like, will you guys shut up? You are fired the next thing you say. Just shut up. You are all making us look stupid. So that's what I have to say. It's kind of turned into like a rather, maybe I need to like put some Xanax or something in this coffee. But I've seen a lot of regurgitation of information. I've seen a lot of regurgitation to help bolster positions that aren't rooted in truth. And don't be a nit who just regurgitates stuff without knowing what you're talking about. And end-tidal CO2 non-invasive is overused. With that, this ends the coffee talk for this Saturday. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful week.